Chapter 13. A New Normal. It's not like Tommy was purposefully avoiding going back home. Definitely not. It had been over a week since Tommy had stumbled his way back to Wilbur's, dizzy out of his mind with his mouth tasting like vomit. He had fully recovered within 2 days, and logically, there was no reason for him to continue staying with the Soots. But Tommy just didn't mention the idea of leaving, and no one in the house brought it up either. The morning after he fell asleep on the couch, wrapped in Wilbur's arms, Tommy woke up to a whole stream of texts from his roommates demanding to know where he was. In his half-asleep state, he ended up telling them he was still at Will's, and not to expect him home anytime soon, and from then on he'd proceeded to ignore all of their follow-up text messages. He was being a coward. He knew this. The right thing to do in this situation was to man up and go home so he could talk things out with his roommates. Then maybe he could stop wearing Wilbur's slightly oversized clothes to work every day, and things could go back to the way they'd always been. But things were never going to be fully normal again. Tubbo and Ronbu were vigilantes, and Tommy was working as a healer for the Syndicate. Any sense of old normalcy they had in their lives was out the window. And even if they managed to patch up their argument, which Tommy truly doubted was possible right now, things would never be as simple or easy as they once were. The thing was, Tommy was terrified of that. He knew it was the truth, but he didn't want to accept it. He didn't want to have to walk into that apartment and feel those icy stares on him. He didn't want his evenings to be sitting on the couch playing random documentaries with no casual bits of laughter or conversation passing between him and his best friends. It was one thing to accept the truth of your situation, but it was a whole other thing to actually confront it. So Tommy just stayed at the Soot house, deciding to put off the inevitable for as long as he could. One of these days, Wilbur or Phil or Techno was going to get sick of having him hang around, eating their food and using their stuff, and he was going to get kicked out. Which was fine, totally fine. Not something that made fear lance through his chest every time he heard footsteps coming down the stairs. It was only a matter of time before he had to leave, and when one of the 3 family members told him it was time to go, he was going to thank them for letting him stay as long as he did and force himself to go home. But he hadn't been given that ultimatum yet, so for now, he was still staying at the Soots. Strangely enough, no one seemed to mind Tommy's lingering presence in the home. Techno offered to drive him to his shifts whenever he noticed Tommy getting ready to leave. Phil would hand him some food to take with him, and Wilbur showed up at the cafe more often than not with the sole purpose of taking the train home with him. No one was surprised when he kept coming back night after night. He was only ever greeted with warm smiles and kind voices asking how his shift went. Though there was something off in the house. It wasn't about him staying there, necessarily. Rather, it was the fact that Wilbur sometimes stared at Tommy like he was a puppy he had accidentally kicked. It was frankly a bit ridiculous how guilty Wilbur seemed to be over the secret he was keeping from Tommy. Although there was a part of Tommy that prickled at the idea of someone else he trusted keeping stuff from him. He believed Wilbur when he said it was dangerous for him to know. Unless Tommy was willing to come clean about his own work with the Syndicate to Wilbur, he had no right to want to delve into Wilbur's secrets. Wilbur clearly didn't seem to agree. It was so obvious that he wanted to just spill out whatever was on his mind, but any time he got close to it, either Techno or Phil would appear nearby and give him a pointed look that would instantly shut him up. But besides all the guilty looks, for the most part, staying at the Soot house was something Tommy found he really enjoyed. It was just so easy. He didn't have to worry about how much food was in the fridge, he didn't wake up with backaches from sleeping on an old lumpy couch. And of course, the light tension in the house was nothing like the storm that had been brewing in his apartment for weeks. Tommy spent most of his time with Wilbur, though he also hung out with Techno and Phil on occasion. Sometimes, they would all be busy with whatever work they did, and Tommy would be left to his own devices, which he found he didn't mind. Wilbur had an old GameCube he gave to Tommy to play on, and he spent hours on end playing the oldest version of Animal Crossing available, which was way more fun than he expected it to be. Tommy tried his best not to listen in when the Soots talked about work. Sometimes Wilbur would pace down the halls with a phone in his ear, talking in vague terms about different plans they had to run through. One night, when Tommy was trying to sneak to the kitchen to get a bag of crisps from the cabinet, he had heard Wilbur talking on the phone and froze. "Quackity, you've been dodging my calls for the past 3 days. Tell me what the hell happened that night," Wilbur said, his voice sharper than Tommy had ever heard it before. There was a pause as this Quackity seemingly replied, and Wilbur let out a shocked noise. "You left him with them? What the fuck were you thinking?" Another pause. "Wait, you said this happened 3 nights ago?" A sharp breath in. "Oh fucking hell, I think I just realized something." There was one more pause, and Wilbur opened his mouth to say something else, when his eyes flitted towards the door, which Tommy was awkwardly peeking his head around. Tommy froze in place, heart leaping into his throat as he realized he'd been caught eavesdropping. Wilbur's expression was unreadable as he motioned at Tommy to stay there. "Quackity, I gotta go. I'll text you my thoughts later," he said, and then he hung up and shoved the phone in his pocket. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to listen in, I was just walking by." "Hey, it's okay," Wilbur reassured, an easy smile slipping onto his face. "You startled me, that's all." "Is everything okay?" Tommy asked, eyeing Wilbur warily. He sounded kind of pissed. Wilbur's face softened at that. "It's nothing you need to worry about, Toms, I promise." Tommy wasn't so sure, but he nodded anyway. "Okay then." Reaching out, Wilbur squeezed his shoulder. "I gotta make another call, but you should go downstairs. Phil's almost done with dinner." As Tommy began to trudge back down the steps, he could faintly hear Wilbur's voice again as he picked up another call. "Hey, Sam? I need to get files on 2 people, but all I have for them is an address." After that, there were no more incidents involving overheard phone calls. Wilbur stopped making business calls in his room, and Tommy couldn't help but feel guilty that it was his fault Wilbur couldn't do his work without worrying about Tommy eavesdropping. However, every time he tried to apologize for the incident, Wilbur reassured him it was fine, and that he needed to stop taking his work home with him anyway. Besides accidental eavesdropping, the only difficult part of living with the Soots was having to hide his second job from the group, which turned out to be easier than expected. Tommy never got questioned when he got back late from his shift because he had to heal someone. Sometimes Techno would make a comment about how Tommy should have called for a ride instead of taking the train at the time. Or maybe Phil would ask if the espresso machine broke again. But there was never any suspicion. There was a certain relief that came with not being under any scrutiny, not needing to make up increasingly ridiculous lies to hide his tracks. Overall, things were really good. Tommy was avoiding his roommates, hiding his work with the Syndicate from the Soots, and was still managing to balance his job as a barista with his job as a healer for villains. So of course, one of those things had to come crashing down. The back room of the cafe was prepped with Tommy's usual setup. He had gotten a call a few minutes before, and was now waiting for his latest patient to show up. Thankfully, this wasn't a potentially lethal injury, just something that was more annoying than anything else, and was drawing too much attention not to fix. There was a soft knock at the door, and when Tommy swung it open, he was met with blood-covered Daedalus. Well, he wasn't really covered in blood. It was mostly just the visible part of his face above his mask. "Is that your blood?" Tommy asked, stepping aside to let the man in. "Unfortunately, yes," Daedalus answered, ducking under the door frame to accommodate his secondary robotic arms. "Got nailed right above my forehead with a piece of glass, and it won't stop bleeding now. The cut isn't too deep, but I can't see with all this blood in my eyes." "Man, here, sit down. Don't want you crashing into something," Tommy instructed, guiding Daedalus toward the towels he laid down. As soon as Daedalus was on the floor, Tommy knelt down beside him, reaching into his first aid kit for a towelette to wipe away the blood with. The movements of preparing his supplies, soaking a towelette in water at the sink and setting aside some spare gauze. It was near as familiar to him now as his practiced routines during his cafe shift. Making sure not to press too hard, Tommy began to wipe away the blood on Daedalus's forehead. A month or two before, his hands might have been trembling while he did this, nerves racking his body at being so close to the famed supervillain. But now, there was no shaking, and no fear. Tommy wasn't sure when he'd stopped being afraid of the Syndicate completely. It had been a gradual shift, and Tommy couldn't say he minded it in the slightest. As the towelette was stained with crimson, slowly the natural peach shade of Daedalus's skin became visible once more. Without all the blood in the way, Tommy was able to spot the cut rather easily, seeing that it was sitting right at Daedalus's hairline. This wasn't a large injury at all, nor one that would be inconvenient for Daedalus to let heal on its own. But also, Tommy knew that it wasn't the type of wound to take anything out of it. Maybe he would be a bit sleepy, but there wouldn't be any worse side effects to healing it in that. So after cleaning off his forehead, Tommy reached up with his hands and let his hands glow orange once more. After only a few seconds, the glowing faded, and the cut had turned into a thin white scar. Once the glowing was gone, Daedalus hummed, and Tommy realized he had his eyes closed.
"That's so relaxing,"
Daedalus murmured as Tommy pulled his hands away. Tommy frowned. "It is?" While he knew what it felt like to heal himself, a bit of warmth under the skin, he had never actually asked how it felt for other people. He wasn't sure if he'd ever heard anyone say it was relaxing. Blinking open his pitch-black eyes, Daedalus nodded.
"Yeah, it's really warm. It's nice to feel."
"Huh, didn't know that," Tommy muttered, picking up the towel again to wipe away the rest of the blood on Daedalus's head. Daedalus frowned, a few wrinkles popping up next to his eyes.
"Can't you heal yourself?"
"Yeah, I can, but it's never felt relaxing before. Just gets warm, but not really in a pleasant way," Tommy explained.
"Probably because you're the one doing the work. When you're healing others, we just get the benefits. If you're healing yourself, you still have to work to do it,"
Daedalus muttered, looking lost in thought as Tommy finally put the towel down. "I guess. I don't know." Tommy shrugged as he set the towel aside to wash it off later. "You should be good to go, though."
"Thanks, Tommy,"
Daedalus said, rolling his neck and lifting his arms above his head to stretch them.
"You all right? You don't seem that tired, but I'm worried."
Tommy shrugged again. "I'm fine. Wasn't a big deal to heal that."
"Yeah, but you still just had a full shift at the cafe. Honestly, I'm surprised you're not more dead on your feet while you're working,"
Daedalus commented, his secondary robotic arms then taking their turn to stretch. Snorting, Tommy snapped the lid to the first aid kit shut. "I could be, you don't know." Daedalus was silent for a moment, considering Tommy with a thoughtful gaze.
"Well, whenever I've come by during your shifts, you seem pretty attentive,"
Daedalus said, a forced casualness in his tone. "Wait, what?" Tommy whipped his head up from the first aid kit, eyes widening as Daedalus pointedly looked away from him. "The fuck do you mean when you've come by during my shifts?" he asked. Daedalus shrugged.
"I was in civilian clothes. Just happened to be in the area, and figured I'd see if you were as good at making coffee as you were at saving lives."
What the fuck? Daedalus had been to the cafe in his civilian form and ordered coffee from Tommy? Tommy had met one of the Syndicate in civilian form and didn't even know it? What the? You weren't worried or anything? That I might recognize you as some shit? Tommy exclaimed, gaping at the man.
"Not really. Even if you did, I figured you wouldn't say anything, but I had a feeling you wouldn't."
Tommy was reminded of when he'd healed Nemesis only a week before, how easily she accepted the fact that he knew her name, without any kind of worry about how that would backfire on her. Instead of being upset, she'd brushed away all her potential concerns with a casual, "I trust you." Have I met any other Syndicate members without realizing it? Tommy asked without thinking.
Daedalus chuckled. "I can't tell you that. At least not specifics. But I will say, I'm not the only one who stopped by your cafe while you're working."
And It's not because you guys don't trust me and want to make sure I'm not doing anything sus. Tommy pushed, narrowing his eyes.
What? No, of course not.
Daedalus shook his head.
It's the opposite. We come there because we trust you and want to just make sure you're doing all right.
The idea of the Syndicate stopping by the cafe in their civilian forms, of risking getting recognized just to check in on him, it was strange. It didn't make sense. Sure, the Syndicate kept saying they trusted him, and at this point Tommy was pretty inclined to believe them. But he didn't understand why. How had he earned the trust of the most intimidating supervillain organization in the city? Huh. Good to know, Tommy muttered, looking at his hands. Guess if I see a guy with green hair walk in, I'll make sure not to look at his face. Daedalus chuckled.
Probably best for you to keep yourself oblivious if you can,
he agreed. Then, with a grunt, Daedalus pushed to his feet.
I better get going, though. Don't want to keep you here too long.
He reached out a hand to help Tommy to his feet as well, and then patted his shoulder once before turning for the door. Tommy waved as he headed out into the alley, the door shutting behind him with a loud click. Sighing, Tommy turned to look back at the rest of the back room, mulling over the new information in his head. He was tempted to think back on any customers that seemed familiar to him, to see if he could find any similarities between them and the Syndicate. But at the same time, he knew that was a rabbit hole he shouldn't go down. He had a strange feeling that if he started looking for similarities between anyone he'd met and the Syndicate, he would find them all too quickly. So instead of doing that, Tommy bent down to pick up the first aid kit and move it back under the sink. Right as he was sliding it under the pipes, though, there was a sharp knock at the back door, and Tommy frowned. Did Daedalus forget something? Hang on, I'm coming, Tommy said, straightening up and heading back over to the door. Did you forget something to... As Tommy swung the door open, his words immediately died on his lips, because Daedalus wasn't the person on the other side of the door. Instead, it was his roommates, expressions hidden behind their vigilante masks. Ronbu was slightly bent over, with an arm wrapped around Tubbo's waist as Tubbo leaned into him, as if Tubbo was struggling to stand up on his own. Even with the gas mask on, Tubbo was keeping his face tilted towards the floor, the hand not grabbing onto Ronbu pressed against his side. What the fuck? Tommy blurted out, without thinking. What were they doing here? Had they really decided to ambush him so they could talk? Look, I know we need to talk about stuff, but Tubbo's hurt, Ronbu said, without preamble. Fuck off, I'm fine. Tubbo bit back, although his voice was tight, and Tommy realized he could see blood staining Tubbo's jacket. You're not fine. You've been dizzy from blood loss the entire walk over here. Ronbu snapped back, his level voice having turned sharp. I'm not dying, so it's not a big deal. Don't be fucking ridiculous. Get your ass in here. Tommy cut him off, stepping out of the doorway and gesturing for the two to come in. Tommy's heart was pounding in his chest as Ronbu half carried Tubbo into the back room, settling him down on the towels that were still stained with Daedalus's blood, and taking off his mask for him. Feeling as though he was on autopilot, Tommy shut the back door, making sure to click the lock before he wandered back over to the sink to take out the first aid kit once more. The room was dead silent as Tommy knelt next to Tubbo on the floor, popping open the first aid kit and taking out some gauze, while eyeing the blood coating his fingers. Anxiety was twisting his gut into knots, but he shoved it aside and tried to focus on falling into the easy routine of his job, like he had with Daedalus. What happened? He asked quietly, pushing Tubbo's hand to the side so he could actually look at the wound. Run-in with 404. Turns out he's got a thing for throwing knives, Ronbu explained, pushing his hood down to rub his temples. I tried to teleport Tubbo out of the way in time, but I was just a half-second too late. Oh, shut up. Stop blaming yourself for everything. Tubbo snapped, hissing in pain when Tommy lifted the jacket away from the wound. It was a slash across his side, and while it didn't look like it hit anything important, it was deep. You can't keep me from getting hurt all the time. Shit happens. Yeah, but I should have... Ronbu, no self-blame in this cafe, Tommy said, cutting him off. Tubbo's right, accidents happen. It's not your fault. Ronbu seemed as though he wanted to argue, but when he opened his mouth again, Tommy shot him a sharp look, and he shut up. He always hated when Ronbu went on one of his self-blame spirals, mainly because it was never actually his fault, but it was always so hard to convince him otherwise. Using the gauze, Tommy dabbed away some of the excess blood. Then, he reached for the wound, but paused. "This is gonna hurt for a second," Tommy explained. "Tommy, you've healed me before," Tubbo pointed out. "Just warning you so you don't bite your tongue." Leaning forward, he reached out to grab the edges of the wound and push them together. Tubbo let out a whine and grabbed Ronbu's hand, and Tommy closed his eyes as his hands began to glow orange once more. This wound definitely took a bit more effort to heal than Daedalus's did. It wasn't by much, but as the seconds passed, Tommy's head began to pound. If he had to guess, the headache wasn't going to go away for the rest of the night. Once Tommy let go, he immediately leaned against the wall, taking a few deep breaths to push past the throbbing behind his eyes. There were a few seconds of silence. Then, Tommy blinked open his eyes and saw Ronbu and Tubbo both watching him. "Are you all right?" Ronbu asked, reaching out to rest a hand on his arm. "I'm fine. Just got a headache from healing that, that's all," Tommy replied, shrugging Ronbu's hand off of him. "Tubbo, how does it look?" "Has a scar, but otherwise it's totally closed," Tubbo said, dropping his shirt back down and laying on his back. "I'm still fucking dizzy, though." "Just give it a few minutes and it'll go away," Tommy told him. Another hush fell over the group, and Tommy dug his nails into his palm. This was what he had been afraid of. The tension suffocating the air between the three, making even the idea of casual conversation feel like torture. It wasn't how things were supposed to be between the three of them. Tommy hated it so much. "We, saw Daedalus when we were on our way here." Ronbu spoke up after a minute and a half of dead silence. Did I heal him?" Tommy asked, raising an eyebrow. Ronbu nodded, and he sighed. "Yep, sure did. Are you going to yell at me now about how that makes me a terrible person?" Ronbu's eyes fell to the ground, and he wrapped his arms around his knees. "Tommy, you're not a bad person." "Do the words, 'You're healing murderers, Tommy,' not ring a bell? You two gave me so much shit and acted like I was the fucking scum of the earth for wanting to give people medical treatment." Tommy snapped, his irritation growing in time with the throbbing of his head. "Yeah, but we weren't implying—" Ronbu started. "Look, I don't want to argue about it. At least not tonight," Tommy said, cutting him off. "I know we need to hash it all out and have another scream fest or whatever the fuck, but my head is killing me and I don't have the energy to get into it with you two right now." "I agree," Tubbo chimed in, still laying on the floor. "I'm way too tired to get mad right now." Sighing, Ronbu pulled his knees closer to his chest. "I get that. That's fine. But when are you coming home?" Tommy blinked, frowning at Ronbu. Home? They wanted him to come home? "I mean, I didn't think you two would exactly be waiting for me to come back," Tommy admitted quietly. At this, Tubbo sat up again, his brows furrowed. "It's your home too, idiot. We weren't going to kick you out or anything just because we had a fight. Not to mention, the landlord told us you paid for the next 2 months' rent in advance, so if anything, you have more of a right to it than we do right now," Ronbu added. "Also, I would ask how you got that kind of money, but I think it's kind of self-explanatory at this point." "Syndicate must be paying you a shit ton for you to get that kind of money so fast," Tubbo said, rolling his neck. "But anyway, yeah. Are you going to stop sleeping on Wilbur's couch and come home?" Tommy shouldn't be surprised that they wanted him to come home. Things were clearly still off between the three of them. No apologies had been made, and they had nearly gotten into another shouting match just a few minutes earlier. But the two of them wanted him to go back to the apartment. Tommy should go home. He knew that. But seeing the two of them again stirred up all the ugly emotions that had come out the week before during their fight. reminding him of the stabbing pain in his chest that was still there and was probably going to stick around for a long time. Tommy wrung his hands in his lap, trying to figure out how to put his jumbled mess of thoughts into words. Could he go home tonight? Just follow the two of them back to their apartment and take his shift in the bed like there was nothing wrong? No, Tommy finally said, forcing himself to look up and meet his friend's eyes. Not yet. Tubbo let out a noise of confusion. What? Why not? I'm not ready to come back yet, he admitted, hunching his shoulders and glancing back at the floor. I need time to think about everything that happened and how I feel about it all. I need some time to sort out my emotions and shit. He waited for the yelling, for the accusations that he was trying to avoid their confrontation. This was something that was going to piss his two friends off, he knew it. But instead, Tubbo just nodded. Okay, that's understandable. It's probably better for us to have some time to sort things out too, Ronbu added, although he seemed much sadder than he had been a few moments before. So we can figure out what we're going to do with all of our situations. Yeah, I guess we'll cross that bridge when we get to it, Tubbo muttered, shaking his head. So you're just going to keep staying at Wilbur's? I am, yeah. Tommy nodded. He doesn't mind that you're staying so long? Ronbu asked, furrowing his brows. Nope. He said I can stay as long as I need to, he explained, tapping his fingers against his calf. There was a beat of silence as both Tubbo and Ronbu considered this. He sounds like a good friend, Ronbu commented. Tommy nodded. Yeah, he really is, he said softly. There was another silent moment before Tubbo spoke up again. So, kinda random, but what the hell was up with that picture of Siren carrying you on the subway from last week? He asks, leaning back on his hands. Oh shit, yeah. The pictures of him with the bandana on his face, being carried in Siren's arms into the train car at nearly 1 a.m, had circulated around Twitter, although it hadn't made the actual news. Should have figured he'd get asked about that. Dream did a number on Nemesis during their fight last week, so I healed her, and it took a lot out of me. Siren ended up having to carry me back to Will's because I was too dizzy to walk, Tommy explained. Wait, did Wilbur see Siren? Ronbu asked, frowning at him. Tommy snorted. Fuck no. He just dropped me off on Wilbur's street and left. So Wilbur doesn't know about... Tubbo trailed off, gesturing to the first aid kit. No, of course not. I already have you two involved in this hero-villain-vigilante shit. I don't want to drag Will in too. Tommy scoffed, shaking his head. Tubbo and Ronbu shared a wide-eyed look, and Tommy recognized it as the look they gave each other when they were having another silent conversation. What? Why are you giving each other that weird look? Well... Ronbu scratched the back of his neck. We kinda... thought that Wilbur was Siren. Huh. Tommy blinked, trying to wrap his head around what Ronbu just said. He and Tubbo thought that Wilbur was Siren? If his head wasn't pounding, he would have laughed out loud at the idea. Ah, yes, Wilbur, who talked about eating sand and couldn't function without 3 espresso shots in the morning, was one of the most feared supervillains in L'Manberg. Yep, made total sense. That's so fucking stupid. Of course Will's not Siren, Tommy snorted. Well, you have to admit, you started mentioning Wilbur to us around the same time we saw you talking to Siren, so it just made sense, Ronbu argued. Nope, I don't know who Siren is outside of the mask, Tommy told them. Huh. Weird timing, I guess. Tubbo shrugged, although he still shot Ronbu a pointed look. Tommy resisted the urge to scoff again. Of course Wilbur wasn't Siren. Sure, maybe they both had curly brown hair and liked to banter with Tommy. And maybe sometimes Siren's jokes did remind him a bit of Wilbur's. And maybe the way Wilbur slung his arm over Tommy's shoulder reminded him of Siren a little bit. No. Tommy was going to shove that out of his head. There was no way Wilbur was Siren. It's not like it was rare to find a white guy with brown hair in the city anyway. Tommy was so caught up in his thoughts that he didn't even notice that Tubbo was pushing to his feet, and reaching down to pull Ronbu up as well, until they were both standing by the back door.
"We should get going now, I think,"
Tubbo said, pulling his gas mask back on.
"I guess we'll see you later."
"Yeah, I'll see you guys," Tommy replied, although the words tasted like sand in his mouth. The door clicked shut as the two of them disappeared into the alley, leaving Tommy with bloody towels and a pit in his stomach. Although he didn't regret saying no to going back home, it still felt wrong to not leave with the two of them. They were meant to be a team, and it was still difficult for Tommy to adjust to the idea that they weren't really a team at all. At least, not right now. His head was throbbing as he stared at the harsh fluorescent lights above his head. Fatigue weighed at his bones, begging him to just lay down and fall asleep on the tile floor right now. But he really didn't want to find out how Puffy would react to finding Tommy passed out next to a bunch of bloody towels in the back of her cafe. So as tempting as the idea of sleep was, he forced himself to stand so he could clean everything up. He chucked the bloody towels in the washer with the rest of the dirty rags from the day, and added extra bleach before turning the machine on. Then he threw out the used gauze, making sure to hide it underneath other trash. Lastly, he put the first aid kit away for a second time that night, and was relieved when there wasn't another knock on the door to the alley. Like usual, Tommy went out through the front of the cafe, his hands steady as he twisted the key in the lock. A breeze passed down the street, making goosebumps rise along Tommy's arms under the sweater he'd borrowed from Wilbur. They were getting further along into autumn now, and Tommy found himself hoping that Tubbo and Ronbu weren't too cold tonight in their heaterless apartment. Maybe with the extra money they'd saved from Tommy paying the entirety of the next 2 months' rent, they could buy extra blankets, or maybe a small space heater. Tommy remembered how last winter it had gotten so cold in their apartment the three of them had had to suck it up and pile onto the bed together in a single heap, using each other's body heat to keep from shivering while they slept. It was cramped as hell, and Tommy had definitely ended up on the floor a few times, but it had been warm. It wasn't that cold yet, though. He was sure Tubbo and Ronbu would be fine. As he shoved his keys into his pocket and turned to head towards the subway station, something made him pause. He wasn't sure what it was, but his eyes darted around the shadows across the street, searching for... well, he didn't know what he was searching for. A person? An animal? A scary monster from a children's book? Tommy didn't know what he was trying to see across the street, but he knew one thing. He felt like he was being watched. Finally, his eyes flickered on something white on the rooftop across from the cafe. As soon as he locked eyes on it, though, there was a flash of movement, and it was gone. Digging his nails into his palm, Tommy hurried away from the cafe as fast as he could without outright sprinting. The being watched feeling didn't go away until he climbed down into the subway station. Only once he was off the street did he stop feeling eyes bore into the back of his head, and his shoulders sagged in relief. It was probably just his own paranoia, but something in the back of his head told him that it was something more. Thankfully, the rest of the ride back to Wilbur's house didn't involve any creepy moments like that. By the time the brownstone came into view, Tommy had almost completely forgotten about the incident at all, and was instead ready to collapse on his bed under a mountain of blankets and hide there until his headache went away. Using the spare key Wilbur had given him a few days earlier, Tommy pushed open the front door and made his way into the living room. Usually, if Wilbur was home, he'd either be in his room or waiting in the living room for him. But instead of Wilbur sitting on the couch today, Techno was there in his place, idly scrolling through Netflix. For once, his hair wasn't pulled back in a bun or a braid. Right now it was loose and hanging around his shoulders in pink waves. While his ears were still filled with the usual gold jewelry that adorned them, he didn't have any rings or necklaces on, and he seemed to be wearing pajamas. Now, this wasn't the first time Tommy had seen Techno in pajamas. He'd been living in the house for a week now, after all. But it was still rare to see the man looking so relaxed, and actually just sitting in the living room watching TV. Along with that, usually Techno spent most of his time either in his room, the kitchen, or Phil's office. Tommy was pretty sure this was the first time he'd ever seen the guy pick up the TV remote. "You're home late," Techno commented, although there was no unsaid question in his voice, asking for Tommy to give him an explanation. "Was work all right?" "Yeah, it was fine," Tommy shrugged, dropping his backpack and settling on the other side of the couch. Squeezing his eyes shut, he pressed his fingers to his temples and leaned back against the cushions. "Is Will in his room?" "Nah, he and Phil are out doing work stuff right now," Techno explained, skimming through a random Netflix category, although he didn't seem very interested in any of the options. Tommy frowned. "This late at night?" "You know how it is." Techno shrugged. No, Tommy did not, in fact, know how it was. But there was a lot about the Soot family business that didn't seem to make sense, so he decided it was just easier not to go asking about it. "Yeah, I guess so." Tommy shrugged, wincing when the movement sent another throbbing pain through his skull. Techno frowned. "You doing okay?" "I'm fine, I just have a headache," Tommy admitted, shutting his eyes to try and ignore the faint pounding. "Let me get you some painkillers," Techno said, the couch shifting as he pushed to his feet. "Techno, I'm fine. I'm not old like Phil. My knees can handle standing up." Techno hushed him, his footsteps fading as he headed into the kitchen. Tommy sighed and sunk deeper into the couch, the heaviness in his limbs tempting him to fall asleep right here and now. He listened as Techno moved around the kitchen, faintly clinking glasses and rattling pill bottles as he presumably got Tommy some water to wash down the pills with. A minute later, the footsteps returned and Tommy's eyes flickered open to Techno holding a glass of water in one hand and 2 pills in his other palm. "I'm also making you some tea, so that'll be ready in a minute," Techno told him. "You didn't have to do that," Tommy mumbled, taking the pills and water and quickly downing both. "You look like you've had a bit of a rough night. Figured it might help." Techno shrugged before wandering back to the kitchen. Tommy frowned in the direction of Techno's turned back, before letting his eyes shut again as he waited for the medicine to kick in. While it wasn't unusual for Techno to do small things for him like this, offering him rides, making him tea or food, the two of them hadn't exactly spoken much during his week here so far. Most of their talking had been done in group conversations, not really one-on-one. Not that Tommy minded. He thought Techno was a really cool dude. Still, though, he felt bad that the guy was going out of his way to make Tommy tea just because he said he had a headache. A few minutes later, Techno came back with a cup of steaming tea and placed it on the coffee table in front of Tommy. Then he walked around to the other side of the couch and returned to his original spot. "Thanks, Tech," Tommy murmured, picking up the tea to sip at it. He stared at the gold liquid that smelled of honey and peppermint, swirling it a few times absent-mindedly. "Either you're thinking really hard about something right now, or you're about to fall asleep into your cup," Techno commented, raising an eyebrow at him. Tommy wanted to tell him it was fine, and that he was just tired. But a part of him also wanted to say what was actually on his mind, at least as a way to make up for Techno making him tea and getting him painkillers. "I guess I'm sorry that I'm still here. I'm pretty sure you guys didn't invite me over thinking I'd be staying for over a week, and I promise I'll leave soon, but Wilbur told you can stay as long as you want, right?" Techno asked, cutting him off. Tommy shrugged. "Well, yeah, but he's Will. Plus, it's not like you and Phil signed up to live with some random kid Wilbur's friends with. So I'm going to leave eventually for your guys' sake." Techno stared at him for a moment, as if he was trying to read Tommy's thoughts, before furrowing his brows and sighing. "For as chaotic as Wilbur is, he wouldn't just drag a child in here without asking us if it was okay beforehand. Not to mention, I don't like most kids. The fact that I said yes to you is like a huge compliment," Techno explained. "You're here because we all like having you around, Tommy. Plus, it's not like we can't afford to feed another mouth, even if you do eat like a rabid raccoon." "You say that now," Tommy muttered, keeping his eyes on his tea. "But what if I stay for 2 weeks? Or 3? You're going to get tired of me eventually, everyone does." It was a pattern Tommy was all too familiar with, thanks to the foster system. The first few weeks in a new home would be generally pretty great. Everyone would be nice, trying to make him feel welcome and help him settle in. But then the novelty of having a new kid in the house would wear off, and the families would grow tired of Tommy's loud voice and impulsive words. Things would steadily get worse, and eventually Tommy would find himself packing his bags. I know you think that because of the foster system. Techno cut in, startling Tommy out of his thoughts. I was the same way. Problem kids can never stay in homes for too long, right? Shit. Tommy had forgotten Techno was a foster kid like him. Well, yeah, but I'm not saying you guys are like those foster families or anything. I'm just saying people get tired of— Stop that, Techno said, his voice somehow both firm and gentle. You're a good kid, Tommy. This isn't a foster home where you have to pass a bunch of secret tests to find out if you'll be let into the family. We all genuinely like having you around, just because we like you as a person. We're not going to get tired of you, and we all meant it when we say you can stay for as long as you want. Bringing his knees up to his chest, Tommy bit the inside of his cheek to keep his eyes from burning. He took another sip of his tea, not trusting himself to speak right now. Techno took that as permission to keep talking. I'm not, great at this social stuff, so you don't have to talk to me if you don't want to. But this had to have been brought on by something at work today. It wasn't a demand. It was an option. If Tommy wanted, he could tell Techno about seeing Tubbo and Ronbu today, and maybe get his advice on that whole situation, in as vague of terms as possible, of course. Tommy started talking before he even made the conscious decision to do so. You know how the reason I'm here is because my roommates and I are fighting? Tommy asked, finally glancing up from his teacup. Techno nodded. Yeah, they had a secret they kept from you, you had a secret you kept from them. It all got revealed and everything turned into a mess, right? Snorting, Tommy nodded. Yeah, it was something like that. Anyway, I haven't really talked to them since our fight, but tonight they came by the cafe, so we ended up having a bit of a talk. I'm guessing it didn't go well. Techno questioned. I wouldn't say it went badly, but no one apologized. They also asked when I was going to come home, and I told them I wasn't sure when I would, because I just feel like— He trailed off for a moment, running his finger along the edge of his teacup. I don't know, I guess I feel like I just need more time to figure out how I feel about all the secrets they kept from me and everything. I understand why they did it, but it also hurts a lot because it was a pretty big thing they kept from me. But I don't know if that just means I'm trying to avoid a confrontation. I think that was a pretty good response, Techno said, leaning back against the couch. Phil's all about healthy boundaries and being in touch with your emotions and stuff, and you recognizing that you need time to think about how you feel about everything would probably make him cry tears of joy since it took ages for him to teach me and Will that. This made Tommy grin into his cup. Glad I can make the great Phil's a soot proud of my emotional intelligence. All the ladies love how in touch I am with my emotions, because that's how real men are, he joked, albeit in a slightly quieter voice than usual. Techno huffed, in what Tommy was pretty sure was supposed to be a laugh. But seriously, though, you're a smart kid for recognizing you need some time. Don't rush yourself. Just think things over, and when you're ready for you guys to have that conversation, you can let them know. Thanks, Tech, Tommy said, draining the last of his tea. That makes me feel a bit better. No problem, kid, Techno replied, shooting him a wry grin as he picked up the remote again. Now, do you have any recommendations for what I should watch? Because every time I ask Wilbur for recommendations, he just sends me really weird, pretentious art films. Eyes lighting up, Tommy made grabby hands for the remote and immediately started scrolling for the documentaries category. Oh, Technoblade, my man, I have got the best movie for you to see. And that was how Wilbur and Phil came home to Tommy being passed out on the couch, while Techno sat completely engrossed in a documentary about polar bears. Wilbur ended up moving Tommy back to his own bed, but the next morning, Tommy and Techno spent the entirety of breakfast talking about how Steve was the best polar bear in that movie, and that he deserved only the best things.